Have you ever stopped to truly wonder if what you perceive around you is, real in the way you intuitively understand it?
It's a fundamental question, isn't it?
Or how deeply your own internal states, perhaps even the subtle rhythm of your heartbeat, might be shaping what you feel and see, often without you even realizing it?
Absolutely. We often take our perception for granted.
Well, this deep dive promises to challenge your common sense, maybe offering a shortcut to being well-informed about the surprising and often, frankly, mind-bending ways our minds, bodies, and even the fundamental laws of physics conspire to construct the very reality we inhabit.
Indeed. Today, we embark on an absolutely fascinating journey, one that draws from some of the leading thinkers in philosophy, neuroscience, and physics. Our mission really is to explore how our understanding of reality,
And our emotions.
yes, the very nature of our emotions, and even the meticulous process of scientific discovery are far more constructed, more interpreted, and ultimately more intertwined than conventional wisdom might suggest.
It's a profound shift in perspective, I think. It really makes you reevaluate almost everything.
It certainly does.
And we have quite the stack of sources to unpack for you today. We're going to dive into the insights of David Chalmers on virtual reality and perception.
A really interesting starting point.
Then Hugo Critley on interoception and emotion, and Lisa Feldman Barrett on the brain's incredible role in constructing feelings.
A lot on the mind-body connection there.
Then we'll pivot to physics with Matthew Pusey, who challenges our objective understanding of quantum reality.
Which is always mind-bending.
And explore the history of scientific thought with Peter Ainstein, who sheds light on James Clerk Maxwell's unconventional sort of maverick methods.
Showing science isn't always linear.
And finally, we'll journey with Robert Dassau to understand Albert Einstein's truly revolutionary conceptual understanding of the universe. Quite a lineup.
It really is.
Mm.
So as we navigate these profound ideas, we'll be asking some really thought-provoking questions for you, the listener, to consider.
Like, is a virtual experience just an illusion? Or can it hold a surprising degree of reality?
Or do our emotions originate solely from the basic workings of the body? Or are they actively and creatively made, as Barrett puts it, by the brain?
Yeah, and what does reality even mean when we dive down to the bizarre quantum level? That always gets me.
And how do scientists truly uncover truth when direct, irrefutable proof is often elusive, forcing them to rely on other, equally valid forms of understanding, like Maxwell's analogies?
Exactly. Get ready for some truly illuminating aha moments, because this journey, I think, is going to fundamentally shift how you think about yourself and the world around you.
Let's dive in.
All right, let's unpack this with our first major section titled The Perceived World is Seeing Believing. And we're kicking things off with a virtual reality and David Chalmers' rather mind-bending insights into why VR might actually be more real than you initially suspect.
Okay, so when we talk about virtual reality, or VR, in this discussion, we're basically referring to technology that creates experiences that feel as if you're in an external reality.
Like you're really there.
Exactly. But crucially, these experiences are typically generated and sustained by a computer simulation. Think of popular devices like the Oculus Rift or the MetaQuest.
Right. Those are pretty common now.
And it's no longer just a niche piece of tech, Companies like Facebook, well, Meta now, are investing billions envisioning VR as the future of social networking.
So it's not just about gaming anymore.
Not at all. The idea isn't just gaming. It's about all of us potentially hanging out, working, and socializing in these immersive virtual worlds rather than just, staring at flat screens.
And what's immediately striking, for me anyway, is how VR doesn't just offer new entertainment. It forces us to reframe these classic philosophical dilemmas that have been around for centuries.
That's right.
I mean, it's not just about a cool gadget, is it? It almost immediately thrusts us into these fundamental questions about existence and knowledge. What's the first big one that VR makes suddenly feel, well, urgent?
Absolutely. VR immediately brings to the forefront epistemological issues. These are the deep questions about the nature of knowledge itself. Fundamentally, how do we know anything is real?
The age-old question.
Right. Descartes, centuries ago, famously asked how we could be sure we weren't being fooled by some evil genius perceiving a world that wasn't actually there.
The Brone in a vat scenario.
Kind of, yeah. With VR, that classic problem becomes acutely relevant. How do we know we're not, in fact, living in a virtual reality much like The Matrix? It's no longer just science fiction. It's a real pressing question that the sheer sophistication of VR technology makes profoundly pertinent.
And beyond how we know things, VR also raises fascinating metaphysical questions. So questions about the nature of reality itself. What is something made of?
Exactly. When you interact with, say, a virtual table or a virtual tennis racket
Yeah.
in a simulated environment, what is its actual nature? What kind of thing is it?
Is it just code or information?
Well, that's the question. Is it purely computational code or information or something else entirely? Chalmers suggests this line of inquiry leads us to consider a new kind of ontology, a new way of categorizing what exists in the world.
A new category of being.
Sort of. It pushes us to think beyond just physical objects and abstract ideas to maybe entirely new forms of existence.
Wow. Okay. And then there are the questions of value, right?
Yes, the profound questions of value that VR brings up. The philosopher Robert Nozick, back in the 70s, used what was essentially a VR metaphor.
His experience machine, I remember reading about that.
That's the one. He used it to prompt us to consider what we truly value in life. His thought experiment goes something like this. If you could plug into a machine, a virtual reality, that was just like ordinary life, but, way better.
Everything you want, none of the bad stuff.
Right. Nicer, more fun, everything you value amplified with no downsides. Would you choose to plug in permanently?
I mean, intuitively, most people back then would say no, right? That we value something more than just pleasurable experiences. Perhaps we value genuine contact with reality or actual achievement, not simulated achievement.
That was Nozick's point.
But I have to ask, do you think that intuition is shifting now? As VR becomes more ubiquitous, as these virtual worlds become more central to our social lives, maybe even work?
That's a fantastic point, and I think it is shifting, or at least becoming much more nuanced. For Nozick, the genuine contact with reality was the key differentiator. But if Chalmers is right, and our minds are so incredibly adept at adapting to new realities,
then what counts as genuine gets fuzzy.
exactly, it becomes blurrier. Perhaps a meaningful virtual experience, one that fosters real connections with other people or allows for genuine skill development, is genuinely valuable in itself, even if it's not physical reality in the traditional sense. It really opens up a new ethical landscape to navigate.
And in a slightly more playful vein, Chalmers even touches on the philosophy of religion aspect.
He does, briefly. It's almost whimsical but thought-provoking. If we did somehow discover we were living in a matrix-like VR, who then would be our gods or creators?
Right, who's running the simulation?
As Chalmers muses, would it be some super-intelligent AI in the next universe up, or maybe just some teenage hacker running all this on her desktop? It highlights how VR forces us to confront fundamental questions about creation, control, and our place in the cosmos, even in a hypothetical sense.
But the core of Chalmers' argument, and this is where it gets really interesting for our deep dive today, is his central question. Is perceptual experience in virtual reality illusory, or is it accurate?
Are things the way they look to be, or are we just seeing things that aren't truly there?
And his answer is surprisingly nuanced. He argues quite provocatively that it doesn't necessarily have to be an illusion, especially not for experienced users.
He makes a crucial distinction here, doesn't he? Between what he calls permanent VR, which is like a lifelong embedding, a true matrix scenario where you've only ever known that reality.
You grew up in the simulation.
Right. And temporary VR, which is what we experience with consumer devices like the Oculus Rift or MetaQuest, where we go in and out of the virtual world.
Okay, so two different scenarios.
And for permanent VR, Chalmers makes the really controversial claim that normal experiences are non-illusory.
Wait, non-illusory, so real?
In a sense, yes. It means if you've lived your entire life in the Matrix, the virtual computer in front of you is real in that virtual space. Your experiences are veridical. They are accurate for that reality.
Wow. That fundamentally challenges our immediate intuition that if it's simulated, it must be fake.
It absolutely does. And to really drive this point home, Chalmers uses a brilliant everyday analogy, mirrors.
Ah, mirrors. Okay, how does that work?
This is where the concept of cognitive penetration of perception truly comes to life. Our background knowledge, what we believe about the situation, can profoundly change how we perceive things, even physically.
How we actually see them.
Yes. He gives the vivid, creepy case of seeing a reflection of a girl in a mirror. And initially, it looks like a girl lacking a torso. But the moment your brain recognizes, that's a mirror, your perception shifts. You no longer see a torsoless girl, but a reflection of a whole person standing behind a barrier. Your knowledge literally changes what you see.
That makes sense. It reorients your perception.
It's so true. Or think about expert drivers using rear-view mirrors in a car.
Hmm.
They don't experience an illusion when they see a car behind them, right?
They just react normally.
Exactly. Their action steering, accelerating, braking are perfectly fine-tuned to that mirrored perception. They've adapted to it. Another classic example is walking into a restaurant with a large mirror on the wall.
Oh, yeah, I've done that. You think the room is huge for a second.
Right. Initially, your brain might interpret it as a window into another larger room, making the space seem much more expansive. But once you realize it's a mirror, the space seems to almost close in on you. Your knowledge literally shifts your spatial perception.
So this demonstrates what Chalmers calls the cognitive orientation of perception.
Precisely. How our background knowledge fundamentally determines the general orientation of how things seem to be in our perceptual experience. If you believe it's a mirror, objects seem in front. If you think it's a window, they seem behind.
Okay, so applying these mirror insights back to temporary VR, how does that play out?
Chalmers explains that if you enter a virtual reality without knowing it, let's say you just wake up in it, you will perceive objects as being in ordinary physical space.
Yeah.
And that is an illusion.
Like waking up with a Google Cardboard headset on and genuinely believing you've been transported to outer space.
Exactly. That's a true illusion because your perception doesn't match the actual reality of your situation.
Right.
But, and this is key, for expert VR users, they adapt. Their brains develop new sensory motor dispositions.
They learn the rules of that world.
Yes. Chalmers recounts his own experience in a research lab in Tübingen, Germany. He was wearing a VR bodysuit, seeing himself in a female body with pointy feet.
Okay, that's weird.
And experiencing the startling feeling of walking on air off a virtual plank or walking through virtual people without collision. These experiences fundamentally alter our normal sensory motor expectations, and our perception adapts to this new virtual reality. We become experts in that virtual space.
So the initial illusion fades as you gain expertise.
It seems so.
Yeah.
He even uses the analogy of shrinking cases, like those fantastical movies such as Fantastic Voyage or Ant-Man.
Right, where they get tiny.
Initially, if you suddenly shrank down to microscopic size, ants might look enormous. That would be a spatial illusion. But upon cognitive orientation, once your brain adapts to your new scale, you would veridically perceive their actual size, which is now massive relative to you.
You see them accurately for your new context.
Exactly. He gives a fascinating example of a neuroscience first-person shooter game where players orient to the virtual space and scale within a simulated human brain. They don't experience the brain as impossibly large. They experience it as a navigable, albeit vast, environment relative to their simulated size.
This suggests that perception is incredibly adaptive then. Our brains just recalibrate surprisingly quickly.
That seems to be the case. So what does this all mean for us? Chalmers suggests that as we use VR more and more, and as the technology inevitably improves, our perception will increasingly adapt. And we will perceive virtual spaces and objects veridically.
Meaning we won't feel like they are less real anymore.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
This directly challenges the common view that VR is inherently a second-class reality or something intrinsically fake or illusory. Its current austerity, that feeling that it's not quite real, a bit clunky maybe, is likely just a technological limitation, not an intrinsic feature of virtual experience itself.
So as the tech gets better, the sense of illusion might disappear entirely for regular users.
That's the implication.
Oof.
Which leaves us with a truly provocative question. As our minds become more adept at adapting to these fabricated realities, where do we ultimately draw the line between simulation and what we consider objective reality? It gets very blurry.
That's a profound thought. Chalmers makes a compelling case that reality isn't just out there, but profoundly shaped by our knowledge and adaptation, even in these digital worlds.
Right.
But what if the very fabric of reality itself, at its most fundamental level, is also a matter of interpretation?
Now you're setting up the next piece perfectly.
That's where Matthew Pusey takes us, diving into the mind-bending world of quantum physics and the nature of reality at scales we can barely comprehend.
Indeed. Even with significant advancements in quantum physics, like decoherence, which helps explain how the bizarre quantum world appears classical to us at our scale, physics still grapples with conflicting views on the quantum state. The core question remains, is it a real property of the world out there, something objective and independent of us?
Or is it something else?
Or is it primarily just our knowledge or our beliefs about that world? Pusey argues forcefully for an epistemic view.
Epistemic meaning knowledge-based.
Exactly. Meaning the quantum state primarily represents an agent's belief or knowledge about what's going to happen, not a direct description of reality itself.
Okay, this brings us to the core idea of QBism. That's quantum Bayesianism, right?
Right.
Which Pusey presents as the most coherent epistemic interpretation.
That's right. And here's a radical departure from classical physics. According to QBism, quantum theory is not directly about the world itself. It's not a map of objective reality.
So what is it about then?
Instead, it's about an agent's beliefs about their future experiences, about how they should bet on the outcomes of experiments they might perform. So the radical takeaway from QBism is that what we call a quantum state isn't a fixed independent property of the universe.
It's not out there.
Rather, it's our best guess, essentially, a highly refined belief about what we expect to happen next. It's like the universe is less a grand, objective clockwork machine, but more a shared, constantly updated prediction model based on our interactions.
That's a fundamental shift in thinking.
It really is. Pusey finds the idea that quantum states are simply probability distributions to be incredibly compelling. He argues they should be interpreted just like any other Bayesian probability we use in everyday life, not facts about reality in some objective sense, but facts for us, guiding our actions and predictions.
This is where Pusey has his first disagreement, or rather, where he's mostly on board.
Yes, this is where he's about 90% convinced. The quantum state is fundamentally epistemic. It's about what we know or believe.
Okay, but then there's an even more mind-blowing disagreement that QBism introduces, the subjectivity of measurement outcomes.
Ah, yes. This is where it gets really interesting and perhaps even more controversial. QBism argues that measurement outcomes apply only to the agent who actually performed or elicited them.
Wait, so if I measure something, the result is only real for me, not for everyone else?
That's the implication QBism explores. It's not something that just happens out there for everyone to agree on simultaneously and objectively. The famous Wigner's friend paradox illustrates this beautifully.
Can you walk us through that quickly?
Sure. Imagine one observer, the friend, is inside a sealed lab performing a quantum experiment. From their perspective, the experiment has a definite outcome, say, a particle spin is measured as up. But to an outside observer, Wigner, observing his friend and the lab from the outside, the entire lab, including the friend their measurement device, is still in a quantum superposition, a fuzzy state of possibilities, until Wigner interacts with it.
So one definite outcome inside, but still fuzzy outside. How can both be true?
Exactly. If measurement outcomes were truly objective and universal, this leads to contradictions. Or it might imply hidden variables, unseen properties determining the outcome, which quantum mechanics largely rules out.
And this isn't just abstract philosophy anymore. Pusey mentions actual research.
Right. Pusey discusses a new no-go result from recent research, basically a mathematical proof, which suggests that even the actual results of actual measurements experienced by actual people might not be objective or universal in the way we typically assume.
That challenges the very basis of scientific observation.
It deeply challenges our fundamental intuition about it. Pusey finds himself reluctantly accepting this possibility, even though it goes against our common-sense understanding of an objective reality shared by everyone. It means the outcomes aren't independent of the observer in a really profound way.
Okay, my head hurts a little, but there's a third point where Pusey is least convinced by QBism, right? The subjectivity of Hamiltonians?
Yes, this is where his skepticism is strongest. Now, the Hamiltonian is basically the rule book that tells a quantum system how to evolve over time. Think of it as the ultimate law governing its dynamics and how particles interact.
The fundamental equations of motion.
Pretty much. QBism claims that if quantum states are subjective beliefs, then this fundamental mathematical rulebook, the Hamiltonian, must also be a subjective part of the agent's belief structure.
Why does Pusey push back on that?
Well, he cites some toy theories where the dynamics of the rules are objective even if the states are epistemic. And more practically, he questions the implication for real-world physics. He asks, was discovering something as complex, elegant, and astronomically expensive as the standard model Lagrangian?
Okay, what exactly is the Lagrangian for us non-physicists?
Think of the Lagrangian as the most compact, powerful, elegant mathematical expression that summarizes all the known fundamental laws governing how elementary particles interact and behave, electromagnetism, the weak and strong nuclear forces. It's incredibly predictive.
So it's like the master equation for particle physics.
In a way, yes. So Pusey finds it hard to accept the QBist implication that discovering this profound structure was merely about particle physicists collectively finding a better way to gamble on future particle physics experiments.
As opposed to discovering something true about the universe itself.
Exactly. It raises that deep question. Are scientific discoveries fundamentally about the objective world itself, or are they just about structuring our beliefs and predictions about it in the most effective way? QZ leans towards the former, at least regarding the fundamental laws.
So, if QBism is right, or even partially right, what kind of world are we living in? Pusey outlines three possibilities.
Yes, three ways to think about the world if quantum theory is primarily about agent beliefs. First, the minimal worldview. What we can definitively say is that quantum theory is the best tool agents have for structuring their beliefs about future experiences. But here's the thorny problem in the philosophy of mind, Pusey mentions.
Uh-oh.
If agents are primitive, meaning they exist as a fundamental concept before the physical world is defined, it becomes incredibly difficult to reconcile with physicalism, the common scientific view that agents, including conscious beings like us, are just physical systems made of physical stuff.
It's a sort of chicken and egg problem. How can the physical world emerge from an agent's beliefs if the agent itself isn't fundamentally physical?
Precisely. It makes explaining consciousness within physics very tricky.
Okay, what's the second option? Pusey's preferred one.
That's Pusey's mundane worldview. Here, the quantum world is made of objective stuff, behaving according to objective laws, and quantum theory is just a corollary, a consequence, for how agents, which are simply complex arrangements of that objective stuff, form beliefs about it.
So agents are part of the physical world, and quantum theory describes how they know things about that world.
Right. This avoids the philosophical problem of agents being primitive. They are simply a part of the physical world governed by its laws. It's more compatible with physicalism.
And the third one, Fuchs's view.
That's Fuchs's Jamesian world, inspired by William James and his radical empiricism. This envisions a richer, more complex reality where experience is central, and quantum theory applies to agents operating within that dynamic experiential world. It's perhaps less concerned with a purely objective, mechanistic picture.
What's fascinating here is that while none of these QBism interpretations are solipsistic, they don't deny an external world exists.
No, they all assume there's something out there.
They all suggest that there's lots more to say about the world beyond just what quantum theory itself describes. It's not the complete picture of reality.
Absolutely. It might just be the best tool we have for interacting with it.
So connecting this back to Chalmers' discussion of VR, it feels like both fields are pushing the boundaries of what we consider objective reality.
Definitely. They force us to consider the active, maybe even subjective role of the observer or the agent and their beliefs or adaptations in shaping what we perceive as real.
It's not just about what's out there, is it? It's fundamentally about how we interact with it, interpret it, maybe even co-create it. And that applies from the macro world of virtual reality all the way down to the subatomic fuzziness.
It's a profound shift in perspective, moving away from a purely passive observer model.
This profound interconnectedness between observer and observed, between our internal states and external perception, leads us really nicely into our next section, the embodied mind, how our inner world shapes perception.
Yes, focusing now on how our own bodies influence experience.
We'll start with Lisa Feldman Barrett's groundbreaking work on emotions, demonstrating how they are actively constructed by the brain, not just passively reflected by the body.
Barrett systematically debunks what she calls common fictions about emotion ideas that are widely believed, but, she argues, are just scientifically inaccurate.
Like myths we all tell ourselves about feelings.
Pretty much. The first fiction she challenges is that emotions have universal expressions that are displayed on faces. You know, the idea that everyone scowls when angry or smiles when happy in exactly the same way.
And this is a crucial insight, isn't it? Especially for anyone who thinks they can reliably read someone else's emotions just by looking at their face. She says that's flawed.
Deeply flawed. She refutes this by explaining that common facial expressions, smiles, frowns, scowls, are actually stereotypes. They were often stipulated by scientists centuries ago and then got embedded in popular culture. They weren't universally discovered as objective facts by human behavior across all cultures and contexts.
So it's more like a science of emojis, as she puts it. We've agreed on symbols, but they aren't innate biological signals.
That's a great way to put it. She highlights that technology companies claiming to read emotions and faces are operating on fundamentally flawed premises because there's simply no universal context-independent fear face or anger face that the brain automatically detects.
That's a really critical point, especially with AI trying to do this. Okay, fiction number 2.
The second fiction is that physical changes in your body, like an increased heart rate or a gut ache or sweaty palms, have inherent fixed emotional meaning.
You mean a fast heartbeat doesn't automatically mean fear?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Barrett firmly refutes this. Your brain, she argues, is what makes these sensations meaningful. Think about it. The exact same flutter in your chest or a knot in your stomach.
Yeah.
It can be interpreted by your brain as hunger, maybe anxiety before presentation, excited anticipation for a date, longing for someone far away, or even distrust of a situation. It all depends on the context.
So the body provides the raw, maybe noisy inputs.
Exactly. The body provides the sensations, but the brain actively interprets them and assigns emotional meaning based on the situation and your past experiences.
Okay. And the third fiction. This one sounds important for neuroscience.
Yes, particularly relevant for neuroscientists and, frankly, everyday thinking. The idea that each emotion has its own dedicated, hardwired circuit in the brain.
Like a specific spot for fear, a spot for anger, etc.
Right. Barrett uses the amygdala as a prime example. It's often called the rock star of brain regions in popular science and widely thought to be the brain's home of fear.
Yeah, I've heard that countless times, the fear center.
But, she points out, meta-analyses, which combine data from many studies, show that the amygdala is significantly active in only about 30% of fear studies.
Only 30%. That's surprisingly low for a fear center.
It is, and strikingly, it also activates just as much, sometimes more, for other emotions like anger or sadness, and even for things that aren't emotional at all, like just experiencing neutral novelty, seeing an unfamiliar face or object.
So it's clearly not just a fear button.
Not even close. She even brings up the compelling case study of SM, a woman whose amygdalas were damaged, basically calcified. While she often didn't experience fear in typical ways,
She could still feel fear sometimes.
under specific circumstances, yes, particularly when threatened directly in a way that bypassed typical cues, like experiencing oxygen deprivation. This highlights that emotions are complex constructions involving many brain networks working together, not simple activations of pre-wired circuits. It directly challenges the philosophical concept of essentialism, the idea that emotions have a fixed underlying essence that we simply detect.
So they're more fluid and dynamic, constructed on the fly.
That's Barrett's view, which leads to her constructive theory of emotion. Emotions are literally made by you, by your brain.
Okay, how does that work? She talks about the predictive brain.
Exactly. This is the core idea. Emotions don't just happen to you as a passive reaction to the world. Your brain actively makes them. Your brain is constantly running an internal model of the world and your body, built from all your past experiences. And it uses this model to make predictions to keep you alive and, well, a process she calls allostasis.
Allostasis. That's not homeostasis.
It's related, but different. Homeostasis is about reacting to return to balance. Allostasis is about predicting needs and proactively managing your body budget, your internal energy resources, to prevent problems before they even occur. It's anticipatory regulation.
Can you give an example of that prediction?
A great real-world example is how your brain raises your blood pressure before you even stand up from a chair.
Before. Why?
It anticipates the need for more blood flow to your head to counteract gravity, preventing you from getting lightheaded and maybe falling. This preemptive action is your brain efficiently managing your body budget to keep you functioning optimally. It's constantly guessing what your body will need next based on past experience.
That's fascinating. So how does this relate to feeling emotions?
Well, Barrett explains that our internal body sensations, interoception, are often pretty vague and noisy. She compares it to a 1950s TV with bad reception. You don't get precise data on your glucose levels or inflammation. You just get a general sense of arousal or discomfort.
Just a general feeling.
Right. Evolution's workaround to this noisy data is what Barrett calls affect, a very basic general feeling of pleasantness versus unpleasantness, or feeling comfortable versus wretched that's always present, like a background hum.
So affect is the raw feeling before it becomes a specific emotion.
Yes. And when this affect is strong, when something significantly impacts your body budget, your brain may then make it meaningful by categorizing it as a specific emotion, essentially interpreting that raw, noisy, affective signal within a particular context.
So it takes that raw boost feeling and labels it anxiety because I have a deadline, or hunger because I haven't eaten.
Precisely. This extends to what she calls perceptual inferences as simulations. Your brain isn't just passively receiving sensory data. It's constantly generating predicted sensory consequences.
Like imagining things.
Sort of. Think about when you imagine a song in your head, or recall the crunch and taste of a red apple just by thinking about it. These are, in a sense, illusions or vague ghost-like experiences. Your brain's neurons firing in preparation for potential incoming sensory input, creating a simulated reality before the actual input even arrives. It's predicting what seeing or hearing or tasting would be like.
So when my brain receives new sensory inputs from my body, like that chest ache, or from the world, like seeing someone frown.
It guesses their meaning based on all this predictive modeling, the current context, and your entire history of past experience. This is precisely why that ache in your chest could be categorized by your brain as yearning, loneliness, anxiety, distrust, or even the beginnings of a heart attack.
The raw bodily sensation might be similar, but the interpretation varies wildly.
Absolutely. And this also has profound implications for social interaction. When you perceive emotion in another person, Barrett argues, you're not actually reading some objective expression off their face. You're guessing the meaning of their body movements, their tone of voice, the whole situation, all filtered through your own past experience and concepts.
Which is why misunderstandings are so common, I guess.
And why discussions around sensitive topics like sexual consent are so critical, because assuming you can directly read someone else's internal state just from their external behavior is not what's actually happening neurologically. It's an inference, I guess.
Okay, this is huge. But there's a constructive side too, right? A core insight about the power of language.
Yes, absolutely. This is incredibly empowering. Barrett highlights that learning new emotion words, for instance, being able to distinguish feeling disappointed from frustrated or anxious from simply feeling crappy, allows your brain to make more specific, more nuanced ad hoc concepts for your internal states.
So having more words gives my brain better tools to categorize feelings.
Exactly. Instead of just a vague, bad feeling, you can categorize it precisely. This is known as achieving higher emotional granularity.
And this granularity, it actually has benefits.
The benefits are surprisingly profound and well documented. People with a richer emotion vocabulary, higher emotional granularity, consistently show better behavior regulation, improved academic performance, and a reduced likelihood of developing depression and anxiety.
Really? Just from having more words for feeling?
It seems so. They're less likely to rely on maladaptive coping mechanisms like excessive drinking or engage in aggressive behavior when upset. And what blew me away, as you mentioned, is there's even evidence suggesting faster recovery from cancer and other diseases.
How could that possibly be connected?
It's linked back to this process of allostasis and body budgeting. When your brain can make more precise predictions and categorizations about your internal state, it can manage your body's resources more efficiently. Less chronic stress, better physiological regulation. It truly implies that we can actively architect our emotional lives and potentially even our physical health by simply expanding our conceptual repertoire for emotion.
That is genuinely empowering. We can learn to feel better, essentially.
In a very real sense, yes.
So while Lisa Feldman Barrett emphasizes the brain's active construction of emotion from these raw, noisy internal inputs and context,
Hugo Critley provides compelling evidence for how the body's signals directly modulate those inputs, influencing how we perceive and feel in a more fundamental, almost pre-conscious way.
Okay, so Critley brings the body back into the picture more directly. This brings us to the fascinating world of interoception.
Exactly. Interoception, simply put, is the sensing of your internal body state. Not just external senses like sight or hearing, but signals coming from within, particularly from organs like the heart, lungs, gut.
Things we don't usually pay attention to.
Often not consciously, no. The heart, for instance, constantly sends pulsatile neural inputs to the brain, signaling its beat-by-beat activity and the strength of each contraction. Critley's research taps into this, revealing a direct, surprisingly profound cardiac influence on our perception, especially our perception of fear.
The heart influences fear perception. How did they show that?
What's truly fascinating here is the experimental evidence. Researchers conducted studies where they presented fearful images, like angry faces, to participants at very precise moments within their individual cardiac cycle.
Time to their heartbeat.
Exactly. They showed images at systole, which is when the heart is actively contracting and sending a strong neural signal up to the brain via baroreceptors, versus diastole, when the heart is relaxed and relatively quiet between beats.
Okay, what did they find?
Crucially, fearful images presented precisely at systole resulted in significantly enhanced processing in relevant brain areas, like the amygdala, and also led to higher subjective fear ratings from the participants compared to the same images shown during diastole.
So seeing a scary face when your heart is beating makes it seem scarier.
That's what the evidence strongly suggests. And this effect was specific to fear. It wasn't seen for neutral faces or other emotions in the same way. Your heart's beat literally seems to amplify your brain's response to potential threats.
Wow. Is there other evidence for this gating effect?
Yes. Furthermore, in another clever experiment called an emotional attentional blink task, fear stimuli were better detected and recalled when they were presented at systole compared to diastole.
So you're more likely to notice and remember something threatening if it happens right when your heart is contracting.
It looks that way. This suggests a direct physiological gating of perception by heart signals, where the heart's activity literally influences what we are most attuned to and even consciously perceive in our environment. It's like an unconscious filter, prioritizing threat detection during specific moments of the cardiac cycle.
Critley connects this back to some older theories of emotion, right?
He does. It provides a modern neurobiological lens on them. There's the classic James Lange theory from over a century ago, which posited that bodily changes, like an increased heart rate or sweaty palms, directly cause emotional feelings. You don't run because you're afraid. You feel afraid because you perceive your body running and heart pounding.
The body comes first.
Right. Then the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory from the 1960s introduced a more nuanced view. It's bodily arousal, like a heart skip, plus your cognitive interpretation of the situation, for example, is that arousal caused by seeing a spider or seeing a loved one that determines the specific emotion you feel.
Arousal plus label.
Exactly. Critley's work deepens this by showing how the precise timing and nature of those bodily signals, like the heartbeat at systole, specifically influences the brain's processing and interpretation, particularly for certain emotions like fear.
And more recently, Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis.
Yes, Damasio proposed that these bodily feedback signals, these somatic markers, can bias our cognition and decision-making, often unconsciously, linking our internal states to how we evaluate choices. Critley builds on this by pinpointing brain regions involved.
Yet the insula.
The insula cortex, in particular, emerges as a key brain region in his research. It seems crucial for processing and translating these subtle, raw bodily physiologies into conscious feeling states, our subjective emotional experiences.
Did they have specific experiments showing the insula's role?
Yes, they did these truly wild, disgust experiments that really underscore the insula's involvement. Participants watched videos designed to induce either bloody disgust, the kind associated with gore and injury, which tends to make people feel faint, or nauseating disgust, linked to contamination and rottenness, which often leads to feelings of wanting to vomit.
Two kinds of disgust, got it.
And they found that brain activity in the insula correlated strongly with both the physiological changes happening in the body, like changes in gastric activity or heart rate variability, and the participants' subjective ratings of how disgusted they felt.
So the insula tracked both body and feeling.
What's more, distinct subregions within the insula seem to be more involved in processing these different types of disgust. This shows a direct, quite nuanced link between specific patterns of bodily signals and our conscious emotional experience, mediated by specific brain areas.
Critley also highlights significant individual differences in this interoceptive ability, right? Not everyone senses their insides the same way.
Exactly. People vary widely in their sensitivity and accuracy in perceiving their internal bodily states. For instance, some people are very aware of their heart beating moment to moment, others much less so. And this isn't just a minor quirk.
It actually correlates with other things.
Yes. Higher interoceptive sensitivity, being more aware of your internal state, correlates with being more prone to anxiety, unfortunately, and experiencing emotions more intensely overall.
That makes intuitive sense.
But on the positive side, it also correlates with better intuitive decision-making, higher empathy for others, and surprisingly, a stronger sense of self, a more stable feeling of me-ness.
How do they even measure that objectively? Interoceptive accuracy.
There are established methods like heartbeat counting tasks where a person tries to silently count how many heartbeats they perceive over a specific time interval without taking their pulse. That count is then compared to their actual heartbeats recorded by an EKG. There are also heartbeat tracking tasks, judging if auditory tones are played in time or out of time with one's own heartbeat.
Okay, so it is measurable, and you said better accuracy protects against illusions.
Yes, a key finding related to this is how a stronger internal representation of self, which seems to be partly grounded in good interoceptive accuracy, actually protects against certain illusions of body ownership. The most famous example is the rubber hand illusion.
Ah, yes, where you feel like a fake hand is yours.
Exactly. If you watch a rubber hand being stroked while your own hidden hand is stroked simultaneously, you can start to feel like the rubber hand is part of your body. But people with high interoceptive accuracy are generally less susceptible to this illusion. Their internal sense of their own body is stronger, more resistant to the conflicting visual input.
But then there was that VR experiment that seemed to go the other way.
Ah, yes. A fascinating twist. They created a VR setup where participants saw virtual hands in front of them. For some participants, these virtual hands were programmed to subtly pulsate in brightness, perfectly in time with their own actual heart rate, fed from a pulse oximeter.
So the virtual hand visually beat with their heart.
Precisely. And this enhanced the illusion of ownership over the virtual hand, making it feel more like their own. Intriguingly, this enhancement was strongest for individuals who already had high interoceptive accuracy.
Wait, so the people who are usually less susceptible to the illusion felt it more strongly when the virtual hand synced with their heart?
Yes. It's a bit paradoxical, but it suggests that when the external visual information, the virtual hand, is made congruent with the internal physiological signals, the heartbeat, it powerfully boosts the sense of embodiment, especially for those most attuned to those internal signals. It's a concrete example showing how these subtle internal physiological signals can actively shape our body image and sense of self, even integrating with completely artificial virtual body parts.
It's like your heart is whispering, yep, this virtual hand belongs to you now.
Something like that. Finally, Critley touches on interoceptive prediction and a fascinating paradoxical gating effect.
More paradoxes. Okay.
The brain is thought to constantly predict internal body states, similar to Barrett's predictive coding ideas. A mismatch or error signal between the predicted state and the actual observed state might contribute to conditions like anxiety and panic attacks. The brain predicting calm, but getting signals of high arousal, perhaps.
That makes sense. What's the paradox?
Here's the intriguing paradox he highlights from research. Those heartbeat signals arriving at the brain during systole seem to enhance the processing of external fear stimuli, as we discussed.
Making threats seem more salient.
But other research suggests that the very same signals arriving during systole simultaneously inhibit the processing of pain signals, particularly pain originating from the body itself.
So your heart beating makes fear stronger, but pain weaker at the same time.
It appears so. This means our subjective experience of the world, what we feel, what we perceive as threatening, what we perceive as painful, is potentially constantly fluctuating, subtly, with every beat of our heart, often entirely below our conscious awareness. It's a continuous dynamic modulation of our reality by our internal physiology.
Wow. So connecting Critley back to Barrett, it's like they offer two sides of the same coin.
In a way, yes. It's a beautiful interplay. While Barrett emphasizes the brain's active construction of emotion from raw inputs and context, the top-down interpretation.
Critley provides compelling evidence for how the body's signals directly modulate those inputs and the brain's processing of them, a kind of bottom-up influence.
Exactly, influencing how we perceive and feel in a more fundamental, almost precognitive way.
It raises an important question for you, the listener, doesn't it? How much of our emotional life is this sort of pre-wired physiological gating, that almost automatic enhancement of fear or inhibition of pain by the heart, versus the brain's learned interpretation and contextual guessing that Barrett describes?
It's likely a constant dialogue between the two. It profoundly underscores the deep, inseparable integration of body and mind in shaping our conscious reality, far more intricately than we typically appreciate.
This profound interconnectedness, this constant shaping of reality by internal states and interpretation, it isn't limited to just our minds and bodies, is it?
No, the way we construct understanding extends even to how we approach scientific knowledge itself.
Which brings us to our next section, the evolution of scientific understanding beyond proof. This delves into how even the bedrock of scientific knowledge is constructed, interpreted, and maybe far more dynamic than a simple linear progression towards definitive proof.
Exactly. We'll start with Peter Achenstein's fascinating insights into the scientific methods of James Clerk Maxwell, who was remarkably, well, maverick for his time.
Einstein immediately challenges the traditional, often quite simplistic view of the scientific method that many of us probably learn in school.
The textbook version.
Right. He contrasts Maxwell's actual approach with common portrayals, like maybe William Whewell's or Carl Hempel's two-stage model, stage one. Discovery coming up with a hypothesis, like Ignaz Semmelweis realizing hand-washing prevented childbed fever.
The aha moment.
Followed by stage two, rigorous testing, where you explain phenomena, make predictions, gather evidence, and ultimately achieve certainty, leading to proof. This model often implies that without that final rigorous testing and proof stage, it's simply not science.
Or maybe just preliminary work.
And then there's Isaac Newton's famous, although perhaps often violated even by himself, official doctrine. Hypotheses non fingo, I frame no hypotheses, or more broadly, the idea that hypotheses have no place in experimental philosophy, suggesting one shouldn't speculate or propose ideas if the results can't be immediately deduced and proven from observed phenomena.
A very strict inductivist view.
This traditional, almost rigid view creates a fascinating modern parallel, doesn't it, with the ongoing debate around string theory in contemporary physics.
It really does. Einstein points this out. Nobel laureate Steven Weinberg openly admitted years ago that string theory, while mathematically beautiful and potentially unifying, would likely be untestable for decades, requiring energies far beyond our current particle accelerator.
Yet he still advocated for it.
Yes, he deemed it a worthwhile pursuit for its explanatory power and internal consistency. But many experimental physicists, understandably, dismiss it as philosophy or not real science, precisely because it lacks that immediate empirical testability, that crucial link to experiment.
So this shows how Maxwell's historical challenge to what actually constitutes science, the very methods scientists use to uncover truth and build understanding, remains incredibly relevant and controversial today. It's not a settled issue.
Not at all. Maxwell's core question, as Einstein frames it, was essentially, what do you do if you don't have a theory that fully explains the phenomena you're seeing? Or even if you have a plausible theory, but you just can't definitively prove it right now.
What's the next step then?
Maxwell flat out rejected the idea of just stopping inquiry, simply because direct, immediate proof isn't available. He believed there were legitimate, scientifically valuable ways to proceed, even in the absence of absolute certainty. For him, it was about more than just proof. It was fundamentally about gaining understanding.
Okay, so Einstein highlights Maxwell's 3 genuinely unconventional methods, showing these alternative yet valid strategies for making scientific progress. What's the first one?
The first is physical analogy, which Maxwell brilliantly employed in his groundbreaking 1855 paper on Faraday's lines of force. The purpose here was explicitly to gain a physical understanding of complex phenomena like electricity and magnetism based on Faraday's experimental work, without committing to a specific theory about their true underlying cause.
So understand how it works without saying what it is.
Precisely. It was about simplifying complex relationships and organizing known facts by finding a helpful conceptual parallel, something more intuitive perhaps.
But what was the concrete example he used?
His most famous one from that paper is his extensive, detailed, 72-page development of an imaginary incompressible fluid flowing through tubes of varying resistance, as an analogy for electric current and magnetic fields.
Okay, so electricity as imaginary water flow.
Essentially, yes. He meticulously developed this analogy, for instance. Fluid velocity represented electric force intensity. The pressure of the fluid represented electric potential. Sources and sinks of the fluid represented positive and negative electricity, not because he actually thought electricity was a fluid.
He knew it wasn't really fluid.
Right. But the mathematical structure of fluid dynamics provided a powerful tool to help him understand the known laws of electricity and magnetism, like Ohm's law, Faraday's law, and even to predict new relationships between them. The crucial status of this analogy was that it was not a claim about the ultimate nature of electricity, but a powerful conceptual tool for understanding how it could behave and how different aspects might be mathematically related.
So it was a thinking tool, not a statement of fact.
Exactly. Einstein argues Maxwell would have considered this a perfectly scientific pursuit, deeply valuable for building understanding, even without proving the analogy represented the literal truth. It's like Einstein's analogy of a detective figuring out how the butler could have done it, based on the layout of the house and known facts, just to see if it's a viable possibility, without yet having proof the butler actually did it. It reviews possibilities and structures thought.
Okay, that makes sense. What was Maxwell's second method?
Maxwell's second method, which Einstein identifies in his 1860 paper, Illustrations of the Dynamical Theory of Gases, was what Maxwell called an exercise in mechanics. Here, the purpose shifted slightly. It was to speculate on plausible underlying causes and demonstrate how observed macroscopic phenomena like gas pressure, viscosity, or temperature could potentially be explained by certain specific microscopic assumptions.
So moving from analogy to a hypothetical model.
Yes, a more concrete, albeit still speculative model. The prime example here is Maxwell supposing that gases are composed of a vast number of minute, perfectly spherical, perfectly elastic molecules in constant random motion, colliding with each other and the container walls according to Newtonian laws.
The beginnings of kinetic theory.
Exactly. From this bold, simplifying set of suppositions, he mathematically derived famous and incredibly important results, like the Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution law for molecular velocities, which accurately describes how gas molecules distribute their speeds at a given temperature.
But what was the status of this model at the time? Did he believe it was true?
Well, this is remarkable. Maxwell himself explicitly admitted in that 1860 paper, I don't know, if his underlying assumptions about perfectly spherical elastic molecules were actually true. Empirical verification of molecular speeds, for instance, with molecular beam experiments, only came much later in 1927.
So he proposed it without proof.
Yes. And he was aware of problems. He acknowledged hitherto unconquered difficulties with his own model, like inconsistencies between its predictions for specific heats of gases and experimental values, and its inability to explain phenomena like electrical conductivity in gases. But despite these known issues, he didn't view his theory as refuted or worthless.
He kept working with it.
He saw it as a highly productive avenue for understanding, a theoretical framework to be refined and worked through. This illustrates that science often proceeds by grappling with problems and inconsistencies within a promising framework, not necessarily by abandoning ideas at the very first sign of trouble, especially when they offer significant explanatory power elsewhere.
Okay, and the third method, physical speculation.
Yes. This appears later, for example, in his 1875 paper on the dynamical evidence of the molecular constitution of bodies. By this time, Maxwell, along with much of the scientific community, had gathered more evidence and had come to genuinely believe in the existence of molecules. The purpose here, Einstein suggests, was to provide a realistic understanding, an explanation for how things probably are, by offering independent warrant or stronger, converging lines of reasoning for the underlying assumptions beyond just their ability to derive the gas laws.
So arguing more directly for the reality of molecules.
Right. For example, he presented arguments like Joule's experiments demonstrating the mechanical equivalent of heat, suggesting heat itself is the kinetic energy of unseen particles. He also pointed to the general success of mechanical theories in other areas like astronomy, arguing that mechanical explanations based on underlying particles often offer the most complete understanding available in physics.
But even then, did he claim proof?
Even with these stronger reasons for belief, Maxwell still acknowledged he had no proof in the strictest deductive sense, and he was still upfront about the remaining unconquered difficulties, like the specific heat problem. He was being scientifically honest about the limits of current knowledge and evidence.
So what's the big takeaway for us, the listener, from Maxwell's unconventional approach according to Einstein? How should this change our view of science?
Einstein argues quite powerfully that Maxwell's actual scientific practice shows that science is a much richer, more multifaceted endeavor than the simple discovery then proof model suggests. Various legitimate scientific activities like exploring analogies to structure thought, speculating on possibilities to open new avenues, developing theoretical frameworks even when incomplete, and seeking converging evidence short of absolute proof are all crucial parts of the process.
So it's not just about the final confirmed result.
Not at all. This challenges the rigid proof-or-nothing mentality that sometimes dominates popular conceptions of science. It suggests that the pursuit of understanding, exploration, and the development of compelling explanatory frameworks hold immense scientific value in their own right, even when definitive empirical proof is decades away or perhaps never fully achievable.
It reminds me of that anecdote about Richard Feynman.
Analyzing the wobble of cafeteria plates.
Exactly. Just pursuing interesting questions because they are interesting, because they might lead to understanding regardless of their immediate value or provability. That impulse itself is scientific.
Einstein would likely agree that pursuit of understanding is a core part of science.
This quest for understanding is sometimes driven by deep conceptual or even philosophical questions, even without immediate proof or a definitive answer, brings us perfectly to Robert de Saulles' insights into Albert Einstein's conceptual revolution.
Yes, Einstein is perhaps the ultimate example of this deep interplay between physics and philosophy.
What de Saulles emphasizes right away is that Einstein's revolution was deeply philosophical at its very core. His groundbreaking physical insights often arose directly from tackling profound philosophical problems about space, time, causality, and reality. For Einstein, the two roles, philosopher and scientist, were utterly inseparable.
You couldn't pull them apart. His physics was philosophy, in a way.
And his theories were not just new physics, Dassel argues, but a profound conceptual revolution. They didn't just add new equations, they literally defined entirely new questions that simply wouldn't have made sense or couldn't even have been properly asked within the old pre-Einsteinian Newtonian framework.
Can you give some examples of those new questions?
Sure. Foundational questions like, how did the universe begin? What is the large-scale geometry or curvature of space-time? What actually happens inside a black hole? Does time pass differently depending on gravity? These fundamental cosmological and physical questions became meaningful, addressable, and empirically testable because of the new conceptual framework provided by Einstein's theories of relativity. He gave us the language and concepts to even pose them.
He literally changed the landscape of possible thought.
Exactly. And a core philosophical problem Einstein wrestled with and ultimately solved, according to Dassel, was how we should think about geometry itself.
The geometry of space.
Yes. Traditionally, going back to the Greeks and through philosophers like Kant, Euclidean geometry was often seen as a necessary truth, something that must be true about space, knowable a priori through reason alone. Or, on the other extreme, you had empiricists like John Stuart Mill who saw geometry as purely an empirical recipe, just a description summarizing what we observe about lines and shapes in the world.
Two opposing views.
Then came the revolutionary 19th century development of non-Euclidean geometries by mathematicians like Gauss, Riemann, Lobachevsky. This spurred a new view that geometry is perhaps an abstract mathematical structure, and we need to figure out which geometry actually applies to physical space through empirical investigation. It needed to be physically connected to describe the world.
So geometry became an empirical question. Yes, but Einstein's innovation, Dassel stresses, was to go even further. He didn't just ask which geometry describes space, he made geometry itself a dynamical field.
Dynamical, meaning it changes.
Yes, meaning it changes, it interacts with matter and energy, it warps and curves just like the electromagnetic field or indeed the gravitational field it describes. It's not a fixed, passive background stage on which events unfold. It's an active player in the universe, shaping and being shaped by what's within it.
That's a huge conceptual leap.
It was a concept, Dassel notes, that no one could even have understood in the 19th century because they lacked the conceptual framework of field physics applied to space-time itself. Einstein himself reflected beautifully on the admirable appropriateness of mathematics to reality, but also its limits, concluding famously, as far as the laws of mathematics referred to reality, they are not certain, and as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality.
Meaning, if it's just pure math, it's certain but maybe not real. If it describes reality, it's powerful but always subject to empirical testing and revision.
Precisely. It highlights his deep philosophical commitment to an empirically grounded geometry, one that must be constantly tested against observation, not just assumed based on mathematical beauty or intuition alone.
Beyond just practical applications, Einstein viewed theory as a crucial instrument of understanding, right? A tool that allows us to explore and make sense of nature, even beyond prediction.
Yes, and it's not just abstract. There were incredibly concrete examples of this understanding leading to practical application. A great one Dassel likely would appreciate is GPS navigation.
Ah, I've heard relativity is involved in GPS. How?
Both special and general relativity are absolutely critical for the accuracy we rely on every day. Special relativity predicts that clocks on the fast-moving GPS satellites should tick slightly slower than clocks on Earth due to time dilation from their velocity. General relativity predicts that clocks in the weaker gravitational field farther from Earth should tick slightly faster.
So two competing effects.
Yes, and the general relativistic effect, faster clocks, is stronger. The net result is that satellite clocks gain about 38 microseconds per day relative to ground clocks. It sounds tiny, but if GPS systems didn't constantly correct for this relativistic time difference,
Your phone's map would be way off.
errors would accumulate at a rate at about 10 kilometers per day. The system would be useless within minutes. So this is a concrete, multi-billion-dollar, real-world application that depends entirely on the accuracy of Einstein's seemingly abstract theories about the nature of space and time. It shows how fundamental understanding underpins essential technology. And Dassel also beautifully illustrates this enduring power of theory as an instrument of understanding by quoting the great physicist Pierre-Simon Laplace reflecting on Newton's theory of gravity centuries earlier.
What did Laplace say about Newton?
Laplace noted how Newton's theory of universal gravitation, even if it was later deemed not the final truth, or superseded by Einstein's general relativity, became a profound means of discovery in its own right. It revealed otherwise hidden empirical facts about the universe that were previously unknown or inaccessible,
Like what kind of facts?
like allowing astronomers to calculate the precise masses of planets and moons based on their orbits, or even inferring things like the finite velocity of light from discrepancies in Jupiter's moon's orbits. Newton's theory, even though not perfectly true by modern standards, was an incredibly powerful instrument that taught us vastly more about reality and guided further discovery for centuries.
So a theory can be incredibly valuable for understanding, even if it's eventually replaced. It's about how much it allows us to see.
Exactly. It's about the understanding it unlocks.
Einstein's own conceptual journey, DeSalle points out, often began with a simple yet profound philosophical question, like the one spurred by the physicist and philosopher Ernst Mach.
Yes, the question was, how do we really know the Earth is rotating on its axis instead of having the entire universe, all the distant stars, revolve around stationary Earth?
That sounds almost naive, but it's tricky. How did Newton answer that?
Newton's answer relied on the concept of absolute space, his idea of a privileged, unmoving background reference frame. He'd say, the Earth is rotating because you see effects like the bulging at the equator or Foucault's pendulum, which only happen in a rotating frame relative to absolute space.
But Mach objected to absolute space.
Yes, Mach questioned this philosophically, calling absolute space fictitious because it was unobservable and seemed like an unnecessary metaphysical posit. He argued that inertia and rotation should somehow be relative to the observable matter in the universe, the fixed stars.
And Einstein picked up on this philosophical dissatisfaction.
Precisely. Einstein's deep insight, stemming from this Machian critique, was that the cause of observed physical effects, like the inertial forces you feel in an accelerating car, or the Earth's equatorial bulge, must ultimately be traceable to observable physical interactions within the system, such as the influence of all the distant masses in the universe, rather than being attributed to motion relative to an unobservable, fictitious, absolute space. This philosophical conviction drove his relentless search for new laws of motion and gravity that were fundamentally relational.
This philosophical drive then led him to a key physical insight, the equivalence principle, famously illustrated by Einstein's elevator.
Yes, here's where it gets really interesting, physically and conceptually. Einstein had the profound realization that the experience of being in free fall within a uniform gravitational field, like an astronaut floating weightlessly in the orbiting space station, or someone unfortunate enough to be in an elevator whose cable has snapped, is locally indistinguishable from the experience of being in empty space, far from any gravity, with no forces acting at all.
So gravity disappears in free fall.
Locally, yes. Imagine a person inside a sealed box, maybe the elevator, dropping bowling pins. From their perspective, inside the box, the pins just float alongside them. They all fall together. No relative force is felt. Weightlessness.
Okay, I get the physical fact. How did that lead to curved space-time?
This profound physical fact of equivalence, combined with Einstein's deep philosophical stance that the laws of nature shouldn't depend on our arbitrary choice of coordinate systems or whether we happen to be accelerating, what's called general covariance, led him to the revolutionary idea that gravity isn't a force in the Newtonian sense at all.
It's not a pull between objects.
Not fundamentally. Instead, it's a manifestation of the curvature of space-time itself, caused by the presence of mass and energy. Think about it. If two freely falling observers, starting side by side in a gravitational field, like two apples dropped from a tower, appear to accelerate relative to each other as they fall towards the center of the Earth.
They get closer together as they fall.
And then a simple, flat Euclidean coordinate system, like graph paper, cannot possibly describe both of their paths as straight lines, which is what unaccelerated motion should look like. You need a curved geometry, a warped space-time, to naturally explain why their initially parallel paths converge. Gravity becomes geometry.
That is just elegant and revolutionary.
It truly is. And a truly profound insight that encapsulates Einstein's enduring legacy, DeSalle points out, is the idea of the survival of scientific theories.
Meaning, even if they get replaced.
Yes. Even if a new, more fundamental theory, perhaps a quantum theory of gravity, eventually replaces general relativity, which many physicists believe it eventually will, for extreme conditions, like inside black holes or the Big Bang, Einstein's great ideas, can and likely will survive in meaningful ways.
How so? DeSalle outlines 3 ways.
Yes. First, a theory can survive simply as a useful tool or approximation in its domain of validity. Newtonian gravity is still perfectly adequate for launching satellites or calculating bridge stresses.
We still use Newton every day.
Absolutely. Second, a theory can survive as a limiting case of the newer, more general theory. For instance, special relativity is essentially a limiting case of general relativity when gravitational fields are weak or absent, or when considering only small regions of space-time. General relativity contains special relativity within it.
Okay, those make sense. What's the third way?
Perhaps the most profound way a theory survives is as a conceptual foundation. Einstein's revolutionary ideas of space-time as a unified entity, of gravity as a curvature of that space-time, of geometry as a dynamical field interacting with matter, these concepts remain deeply meaningful and foundational to how we think about the universe.
They've changed the questions we ask and the way we look for answers.
Exactly. Regardless of what the ultimate final theory of quantum gravity might look like, these Einsteinian concepts have fundamentally reshaped our conceptual framework for understanding reality at its largest scales. They are now an indispensable part of our scientific lexicon and worldview. They survive as deep understanding.
So connecting this back to Einstein and Maxwell, Dassel powerfully reinforces the point that scientific progress isn't always a neat, linear march toward final proof.
No, it's often much messier and more interesting.
Einstein's revolution vividly demonstrates how deep philosophical questions and dissatisfactions can fundamentally reshape our conceptual framework for understanding reality, driving the search for new physics and leading to entirely new lines of physical inquiry, even when the ultimate proof or final theory is still evolving or perhaps even unattainable.
It really highlights the dynamic, iterative, and deeply interconnected nature of scientific and philosophical thought in shaping what we believe to be true about our universe, how we construct our understanding.
Wow. We've gone on an absolutely incredible deep dive today, haven't we? Exploring some truly mind-bending ideas.
We really have. We've journeyed from the nature of virtual worlds all the way to the very fabric of space-time, and from the subtle beating of our own hearts to the complex, brain-based construction of our emotions.
It's become crystal clear, I think, that our perceptions of reality, the very nature of our feelings, and even the bedrock of scientific understanding are far more constructed, more interpreted, and far more dynamic than our common sense often suggests.
Absolutely. It's not just a simple reflection of what's out there.
From Chalmers, showing us how our knowledge and adaptation shape what feels real, even in purely virtual worlds.
To Barrett and Critley, revealing the brain's active, predictive role in constructing emotion from our body's often noisy internal signals.
To Pusey, challenging the very notion of objective reality at the quantum level, suggesting it might be observer-dependent.
And finally, to Ainstein and Dassel, illustrating the creative, nonlinear, and often deeply philosophical paths scientists like Maxwell and Einstein took to build understanding, often long before proof was possible.
It's just abundantly clear that the lines we typically draw around truth and reality are incredibly complex, maybe even blurry, and definitely permeable.
It almost feels like the universe, or at least our experience of it, is constantly collaborating with our consciousness, our minds, our bodies.
It truly does. This journey through these diverse perspectives, from philosophy of mind to neuroscience to quantum physics to history and philosophy of science, reveals a powerful common thread, doesn't it?
What stands out most to you?
That the observer, the interpreter, the mind, which is fundamentally you, the listener, plays a central, active, and frankly, indispensable role in shaping the reality you experience.
It's not just a passive reception of information coming from the outside world. It's a dynamic, ongoing process of prediction, interpretation, construction, maybe even co-creation.
So thinking about all this, here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
Let's hear it.
If our perception of the world, our understanding of science, and even our very emotions are so profoundly constructed, interpreted, and subject to constant reorientation based on knowledge, context, and maybe even our heartbeat, what responsibility, then, do you have as an individual to actively orient your own reality?
That's a deep question. What does it mean to take responsibility for a constructed reality?
How might embracing this idea, the fluidity and constructedness of what we perceive and feel, rather than maybe clinging rigidly to a fixed objective view, change your daily interactions, your understanding of yourself and others, and your approach to making sense of the complex, often conflicting information that constantly bombards us in the world today?
It suggests a degree of agency, perhaps, in how we experience the world and ourselves. Something to definitely think about.